All right, welcome to another edition of our football showcase. We're doing this on Thursday this week to give you a little bit more time to watch our video before the game on Saturday. Cory Geiger, Jason Dambach, and JD. Penn State sitting here at 0-4. Just a tough loss at Nebraska. Fell behind again. What do you make of just the way this season has played out so far?
Well, I mean, there's no way to describe it other than highly disappointing. The way they've started games, in particular the last three, is particularly concerning. They just didn't get off the bus in time for the Nebraska game. We all know what happened with Maryland. And again, those were two highly beatable opponents. So you can't have any measure of confidence in any of these remaining games, frankly. I know we'll talk about the Iowa game here, but, just the way they started games is a major concern.
Yep.
There's a myriad of other issues, but, they just really don't appear like they've been ready to play games.
Yeah, just not ready to play, and just bad turnovers in the first half. So I just don't see any way that James Franklin goes back to Sean Clifford this week. I just don't think you can, as a leader who's going to teach accountability and competitiveness within your program. And maybe, fingers crossed, you take Clifford out of the mix. If Will Levis can hang on to the ball and not, cause big turnovers, maybe they won't get down into these big deficits in the first half. But do you see any way that Sean Clifford starts this game?
No, I don't see any. I don't know how you can. Now, I'm not saying that we're not going to see Sean Clifford again at some point this year. Who knows how that all plays out? But you have to go to Will Levis here. He wasn't perfect by any stretch, but they got back into the game with him at quarterback. Could he have made a few more plays? Sure. But I think you have to see what he can do now with a potentially positive game script, with him in the game plan. You need to know what you have there. For 2 years, they've been bringing him off the bench, spot play here and there, gets a chance to come into a game that they were down 3 touchdowns last week. But again, it's really hard to judge him based on that because, again, there was really very little pressure down by that much. Obviously, they were throwing the ball a lot. You've got to see him in a scenario where he, the game plan is built around his skill. And the play calling, hopefully, with a positive game script, you can see what he does there. And with the opponent having an opportunity to prepare for him. So you want to know what you have in Will Levis. I think you have to go that route.
So here's where it gets interesting, what we'll find out on Saturday. With all of those things with Will Levis, can Penn State compete from the beginning to the end of a game against a good Iowa team? This is a good Iowa team that can give Penn State trouble even with a good offense. This Iowa team could potentially give Penn State trouble. But what we're going to find out now is, I think, what kind of quarterback Will Levis is. I've said this repeatedly. Is he a running back who's playing quarterback? Or is he a quarterback who just likes to run a lot? Because what we've seen with him is when he gets a chance, he takes off and runs. And yes, you can be successful in football like that nowadays. I don't think that you can get to any kind of next level with that, because you've got to be able to make plays. So what are we going to need to find out from Will Levis throwing the ball, especially once you get into the red zone where those windows tighten and you've got to be much more accurate and have touch on it, as James Franklin has said?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we saw him last week. He missed some throws. I think the tendency, and your article earlier in the week kind of played off of James Franklin's comments that, when a young quarterback comes in the game, he tends to want to throw the fastball, whereas he missed some throws because he wouldn't throw the changeup. Mm-hmm. But again, that's all game flow, and those are the things that he just needs time in game situations to work through that. But yeah, I mean, and again, we're still sort of figuring out now that, we're on a fourth offensive coordinator, I guess, of the James Franklin era, and with Kirk Ciarrocca now, what kind of offense are they? And what do they want out of the quarterback? And what you saw last week out of him was really one read. If it wasn't there, then he's going to pull it down and take off. And they've had some success with that. But I wonder, part of the reason why they aren't a little more sustainable on some of these drives is because, they're not progressing through the reads and finding open receivers at times.
He just wants to take off and run.
Pull it down and run. And certainly, if you watch the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten, not to compare Will Levis or Sean Clifford to Justin Fields. But again, he's a guy that can run, obviously, but he can also progress through his reads and make all the throws. So, certainly you want your quarterback to be able to do that. But even going back, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You did a little more film study than I have, even in the Trace McSorley era. No, it wasn't like he's going to stand back in the pocket and look at all his reads. I mean, that's kind of the way they've been, even when they were successful.
The last year with Trace, when he had to do too much because the receivers were dropping all the balls, he would take off and run a lot more than what you wanted to see. And that's how you get banged up. But 16 and 17, when Trace was really good, here's what he did. He stepped up in the pocket. He kept his eyes downfield, and he was able to make plays as things developed. He would avoid the pressure, step up in the pocket, hit an Irv Charles, hit a Saeed Blacknall or whatever downfield. And those were huge plays during that era. So that is a really good point. And if you decide immediately that as soon as you get out of the pocket, you're going to run, you have cost yourself the ability to be able to make one of those kind of plays.
Right. So we'll see what we get with Levis if he is indeed the starter. But again, to your original question, I think you have to go that route. You have to see what you have with him. And the biggest concern would be, all right, well, what if they start poorly again? What if he, starts out in a hole? Do you have the tendency to want to go back to Clifford? Is this kind of a wake-up call for him? Because clearly what he showed last year was he's a good quarterback. Things have just sort of snowballed on him this year, but I don't think you want to close the book on him either. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how they manage this situation moving forward. But again, it's all going to be dictated by, are they going to start winning football games?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be the bottom line. Whoever is the quarterback that helps them win is going to be the hot hand and the guy that we're going to see more.
I want to, JD, take a step away from football here, from the hard football analysis for just a minute. And we're going to get back to the game and give you a score prediction here in a minute. But what we're doing today is we're breaking down a football game like we would under any other normal circumstance. I want to ask you if it's fair for us to do that. Should we be doing that in these circumstances when clearly nothing is normal? All right, so what I want to mention is James Franklin has talked about it this week. Folks, they have had 43 false positive COVID tests. 43. That is insane. My 8-year-old son had to have a COVID test last month. We were on pins and needles for 3 days till we got the results. He was negative, but we couldn't be around anybody. We had to make sure everything was safe. What I'm asking you is, under these circumstances, should we be breaking down football and analysis like it were any other year? Or do all of us, me included, because I'm gung-ho, I'm into the X's and O's. Should we take a step back and just put a giant asterisk on this year and say, hey, no matter what we're seeing, we have to understand that these are just ridiculous circumstances these people are going through, and it's probably just impossible for them to fully focus on football.
Yeah, I've been wrestling with that myself just as a fan, watching college football, watching the NFL. How much stock do you put into the teams that aren't playing well and all the situations that, surround just getting to game day? You mentioned, the COVID testing, and I think James Franklin's quote from your article the other day and from his press conference was something to the effect that, just having to show up and take a COVID test every day is draining itself, let alone the period after that, having to wonder, am I positive? Am I the reason why, our team might not be able to play this week? And then to know that the program has had so many false positives, you do have to take that into consideration. But more and more I think about it, look, everybody let's just focus on the Big Ten, okay, and Penn State. Everybody's in the same boat. Now, I'm not saying everybody's had as many false positives as Coach Franklin claims that they have had. But, for the most part, the 14 Big Ten schools have been under relatively similar protocols. Similar amount of practice time. I know there's been some variation. Some programs have been shut down. But the bottom line is they're all on level footing here, Cory. And so do you want to go overboard, and do we want to get, screaming from the rooftops and throwing things about their performance? No, I think you have to take that into consideration. I think you have to keep it in perspective, but you also can't sweep it under the rug either. You've got Indiana's 4-0. They're playing great football. Ohio State hasn't missed a beat. You're starting to see clearly the programs that have been able to rise above all of the distractions and those that haven't. And you could probably draw a conclusion right now that Penn State has not handled those as well as others.
Sure, there's no doubt they haven't. And you have a quarterback turning the ball over. I just call it a perfect, I can't say the word, bleep storm. It's a perfect storm for Penn State of the things that have gone wrong. It just hits home. James Franklin mentioned this yesterday, JD. Cornerbacks coach Terry Smith had to miss 2 days of practice this week because of a false positive. Defensive coordinator Brent Pry had to miss yesterday because of a false positive. So do you know what they're doing? They're carrying a computer out onto the practice field so that Brent Pry can watch practice over a video on a computer. I call it the theater of the absurd. What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, obviously, you got to play football because of the money. It's the bottom line. But is it any surprise that once the wheels kind of come off and you start going the wrong direction, even a program that has good character and leadership like Penn State, it just might be easier to fold it up mentally because of all of this stuff that you're going through. Not to say that it's right. I'm just saying that is it somewhat understandable?
It's somewhat understandable, sure. But I can guarantee you they're not making any excuses. That when they get out there at 3:30 against Iowa and line up against them, it's another football game. No matter how they got there, it's another football game, and they've got to find a way to play better. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're a Penn State fan, you're going to look at this year and justify it and rationalize it by a lot of the things that we've talked about here. But I guarantee you, Indiana and their fans right now, at least until they play Ohio State on Saturday, this has certainly been the greatest year they've had. I mean, it's only been a month, but this is the highlight of an Indiana football fan's life right now that's been following that program for a long time. And I guarantee they're not going to give any of this back either.
Yeah, so, that's right.
All right. But it's an interesting discussion. It's one that I think as a fan or a journalist like yourself that covers the team, you sort of have to keep that perspective in mind, because there's certainly nothing typical about what we've seen this year.
That's why I really truly want to see Will Levis start over Sean Clifford, because I think that the holes they got in created a here we go again mentality. If you're losing games and all of a sudden you're down 7-0, 14-0, a blink of an eye, it's hard to keep that full concentration and focus. Now, I don't think if they can avoid the turnovers, I don't think they'll fall in a huge hole against Iowa. But I do think Iowa's just better than them, Jason. Iowa's coming in here with a ton of confidence. And yeah, I know Penn State's beaten them 6 years in a row, but Iowa is going to punch you in the mouth. They're not going to quit. Those kids, they're the epitome of toughness in college football. They're going to run the ball. I guarantee it. They're going to run the ball. Can they throw it well enough, to surprise Penn State? A lot of years they haven't, but when I look at this Iowa team, I don't think this is even close. I think Iowa is a better team than them. I'm a little surprised that the line is actually only a couple points. They're still showing Penn State a lot of respect.
Yeah. Well, and let's not forget, you talk about distractions. Iowa's going through everything Penn State's going through with the testing and all the COVID stuff. And let's not forget that Kirk Ferentz is under a lot of heat with that discrimination lawsuit that came down a week and a half ago. So you add that in as well. They seem to have handled things pretty well the last few weeks and blowing out Michigan State and Minnesota. Their only two losses were those close games against good teams, Northwestern and Purdue. So yeah, they've shown so far this year, Cory, early in their first three games, they were very pass heavy. And then last week, they only threw the ball was 9-10 times or something like that, or only had to complete 9 passes last week. So they've shown they can beat you a couple different ways. They can play a few different ways. Yeah, I think Iowa is a better team. And until Penn State comes out of the gate stronger, it's going to be hard to pick them to win any of these games.
I picked Iowa to win 27-20. I think it could be worse than that because I just think Iowa, they're coming in here with a ton of confidence. I think you could get to double digits. What kind of score you see?
Yeah, I in my mind 30-20, Iowa over Penn State.
All right. Let's move ahead. I wanted to spend a couple minutes on college basketball because we've got college basketball season starting next week. JD and I are big college basketball fans, and we're going to see a lot of craziness in college basketball too, JD, because it's going to be winter break. These schools are going to be out. The kids are going to be on campus by themselves for the most part, and yet they can't be with their teammates all the time because you got to kind of be in some isolation there too. So what impact do you think it's going to have on college basketball, especially the first couple of weeks where, these kids are going to have to be going through a whole heck of a lot themselves just to be able to play?
Yeah, it's going to be an unusual environment, certainly. We've now gotten used to college football with either no fans or very few fans, and we're going to have to get used to that in basketball. But, the one thing I'll say about in basketball, these kids, they're used to this a little bit, right? No, they didn't sign up to come play Big Ten basketball or ACC basketball to play in front of nobody, but they spent all their time in AAU basketball in empty gyms. They're used to being very flexible, playing a lot of games, to schedule changes and things like that. So, I think there's actually going to be an easier adjustment, but we will see a lot of changes. I mean, the schedule that we saw put out, if we just talk about Penn State and the Big Ten for a minute, what do you think the odds are that that's the schedule as it will be played? Probably not. In fact, most of the opponents could possibly change as well, including in the non-conference. I mean, they're scheduled to play Drexel next week, but by tomorrow, that could all change. So, and you're already seeing that across college basketball where out of the 357 programs, if I'm not mistaken, Cory, 30 or 40 of them right now are shut down. That includes the Ivy League, who won't be playing, but that's just going to continue to be a storyline that we have to keep an eye on.
Now, you brought up a great point. This is the difference with basketball. Basketball players are used to playing at any time. You play open gym. You might play a game at 10 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Basketball players, it's not about a regimen of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then play on Saturday. Basketball players, it's one of my favorite things about high school basketball playing, JD. You just go play at any time. Going to basketball camp, you might have 7 games in the sweat box, throughout the summer. And so the reason I think that's important is because I don't think we're going to see, like this year, you saw Penn State and Michigan just really collapse in football while some of these lesser teams maybe are playing better. I think basketball will lend itself more to the better teams are going to take over. Now, yes, there's some parity, but these kids, basketball players, are much more used to this type of randomness with when and where they play than football players are.
Absolutely. It's more about the Jimmies and the Joes and the X's and the O's, as they say, right? So the cream will rise to the top. And if you think about it for a minute, Cory, at the most important time of the year in March in basketball, you get to conference tournament play. You're playing 3 or 4 days in a row. You have to prepare for an opponent on 12 hours notice, right? In the NCAA tournament, you win your first round game. Now, you know who the 2 teams you could possibly play are, but you don't really have an opportunity to fully prepare. In the NCAA tournament, you only have about 24 hours to prepare for what is your biggest game of the year. So again, I think in basketball, we've got a lot more flexibility, and I'm really excited about it. It's going to be really unique, but of all the sports that we've seen, I think this is the one that no matter all the stuff that's happening with testing and travel and schedule changes, I think you're still going to see the same product that you normally would see.
What does it tell you? Last night was the draft. Marcus Howard, a sensational scorer at Marquette, didn't get drafted. Miles Powell, sensational scorer at Seton Hall, didn't get drafted. Penn State fans will point to Lamar Stevens. He doesn't have the kind of jump shot. I'm not as surprised about him. But Marcus Howard, Miles Powell, they're a little shorter. What does it tell you about these college superstars that we see? I'm a Syracuse fan. Jerry McNamara is a legend at Syracuse. Scored 2,000 points. Never played a second in the NBA. Taylor Battle, I think the best player in Penn State history. Never played a second in the NBA. So what does it tell you about the difference between college and the pros?
Well, I'm not going to profess to know a lot about the NBA. I don't watch it a ton. I consume a ton of college basketball, but I did watch the draft last night. And as that was unfolding, I thought the same thing. I mean, if a guy who scored 27 points a game in a major conference like Marcus Howard couldn't get drafted, you mentioned Miles Powell, Seton Hall, and others, and Stevens, was sort of a borderline guy anyway. But it saddened me, to be honest, because it continues to de-incentivize the best players to come back and play in college basketball. And I guess, and again, I'm not one to speak for the NBA, but it's very clear that if you're 21 years old or 22 years old, you're too old to be drafted, frankly. I mean, that's what as I watched things last night, that's what went into my head. So, it's unfortunate because in a lot of ways, Cory, this offseason was encouraging for us college basketball fans in that a lot of these top talents did come back. They didn't have the opportunity to go through the combine circuit. We didn't have the NCAA tournament, which is certainly a big stage for people to rise to the top and improve their draft status. So because we didn't have those opportunities, these guys came back to college basketball. And I was hoping maybe this would be a start of a bit of a reversal of trend, but clearly that the NBA results last night, the draft results, told us otherwise.
All right. For Jason Dambach, I'm Cory Guy. We're going to do a lot more college basketball next week. We're going to have a good full college basketball season preview, JD and I. We're both looking forward to that. So I've got 27-20 Iowa over Penn State. What's your score again?
30-20 Iowa.
All right, very good. Appreciate the time as always, folks. We'll do this again next week.